Well, on day 3 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, here are where the things stand. Earlier today, a residential building in southwest of Kyiv was reportedly hit by shelling. Authorities report that multi-story building was hit and evacuation process is still underway. Meanwhile, Russia's communication regulator has accused 10 media outlets of falsely depicting what Russia calls a special military operation in Ukraine, further advising media not to use words like invasion and assault. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, has said that Russian forces have not captured the southeastern Ukrainian city of Melitopol. This despite Russia claiming, according to British assessment, Russia so far failed to capture any of its day one targets for its invasion of Ukraine.
Всім доброго ранку, українці. Зараз в мережі дуже багато з'явилось фейкової інформації, що немов я закликаю.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine is fighting for the invader with weapons in hand and defending its freedom and European future, further asserting on how it was a crucial moment to decide on Ukraine's membership with the European Union. In a letter to the Parliament, the Netherlands has affirmed its support and said that it will supply 200 air defense rockets to Ukraine as soon as possible. The Czech Republic has also said that it will donate machine guns, automatic and sniper rifles, pistols and ammunition valued at $8.6 million to Ukraine. Meanwhile, an Air India Boeing aircraft which departed from Mumbai for Romanian capital Bucharest early on Saturday to bring back Indian citizens stranded in Ukraine is expected to arrive later today. There are many conflicting reports on the casualties. UK yesterday said that Russia lost 450 of its troops, while the Ukrainian health minister claims that 198 Ukrainians have been killed in the fighting so far. Well, this is day 3 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Here are where the things stand right now. Earlier today, a residential building in southwest of Kyiv was reportedly hit by shelling. Authorities report that multi-story building was hit and evacuation process is still underway. Meanwhile, Russia's communication regulator has accused 10 media outlets of falsely depicting what Russia calls a special military operation in Ukraine, further advising media not to use words like invasion and assault. Well, for more on this, Professor of International Politics Scott Lucas is joining us from London. Lucas, welcome to WION.
Very good day to you. Thanks for having me here.
Now, critics say that the US or the West is just barking while issuing sanctions, and that the sanctions should bite hard. Professor, in your own view, do you think sanctions will deter Putin in the long run?
The key phrase you've asked is in the long run. In the short run, I don't think any amount of sanctions, not just from the US, but from Europe, including the European Union, and from the international community, Canada, Australia, Japan, and other countries, will stop the Russian military offensive and the likely Russian occupation of most of Ukraine. But this is only the first phase of what could be a long-running conflict. So if you take the likelihood of a Ukrainian insurgency challenging the Russian occupation alongside the expanding sanctions, sanctions affecting Putin, his inner circle, and the Russian economy, thus ordinary Russians, yes, I think it will make a difference. I don't think that we have two different parallel paths going on here. One are the military events we're watching inside Ukraine, but the other is the economic and I think the information battle. And I think it's those areas that Putin has already lost, to be honest with you, even as he tries to make Ukraine part of greater Russia.
While some European Union leaders claim that Putin will not stop at Ukraine, he may attack other Baltic nations. Is that possible? And if that happens, is the world prepared for the ramifications?
Oh, it's not just possible, it's already happened. I mean, remember that Vladimir Putin has carried on a war inside Ukraine since 2014 with cyber attacks, economic sabotage, special forces, missiles to Russian proxy groups. But he has also been attacking Baltic states with cyber attacks since 2007, 2008. He's been undermining governments in the Balkans and in Moldova. And so, yes, that's why a lot of the activity right now you've seen is to bolster NATO members, to make sure that they're reassured at the time of crisis, and also to send out wider signals regarding the fact that this type of aggression cannot stand. Can I tell you that this stops Vladimir Putin? No, I can't tell you that. I think Vladimir Putin is at a stage where he's an old man. He's been in power for more than 20 years, and he's attempting to leave a legacy. And his legacy is this idea of a greater Russia, one that isn't working with the international community, but tearing down the international order. I think it's a huge gamble. I think it's one that at the very least you have to recognize how severe this is, not just for Europe, but indeed for other areas of the world, including India.
The US and several countries are saying they will add more military aid to Ukraine. But how will they do that while most borders are controlled by Russia?
Well, I think, again, after we get past the first phase, which is even if Russia is able to put in, let's say, a puppet government in Kyiv through its siege, and even if it takes other cities, I think it's going to be difficult for Russia to occupy all of Ukraine. Ukraine's a very large country, remember, with a very large city, Lviv, in the west. And so it's quite likely that you would see support of the Ukrainian government, which moves to Lviv, for example. And it's easier there to supply defensive military equipment to Ukrainian forces. And let us be honest, it's easier to supply equipment through Western Ukraine to any insurgency that resists the Russian occupation. So yes, it is quite possible to build up this support for at least part of Ukraine, provided the international community thinks that's the way to go.
There's also another issue, Professor. Russia vetoed a draft UN Security Council resolution that would have deplored Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, while China abstained from the vote. Western countries view the move as a win for showing Russia's international isolation. Professor, despite the positives, what consequence will this isolation of Russia have beyond the conflict?
Well, I think at the UN it's largely symbolic. Because Russia did veto the resolution. I think a non-binding resolution may pass, but I think it's significant that China abstained. I think it's significant that China didn't use its own veto. China, a lot of people are saying, well, that China will prop up Russia, that whatever the sanctions, the extent of the sanctions, China will be there. I'm not sure the Chinese want to do that. I'm not sure they want to tie themselves to what might be a losing bet with what is already a weakened Russian economy. And I think on the wider front, in terms of, the information battle, as it were, when Vladimir Putin went into Ukraine to effectively try to occupy it, not just the eastern part of Ukraine, but most of it, he changed the narrative. The idea that Russia is a victim, the idea that Russia is sort of at the peril of NATO coming in and taking over Moscow, that's gone. There are very few people, except for diehard supporters of Putin in the West, that hold to that line. And so you have to ask, where does Russia come back from here? Where does Russia come back from a country which is not seen as one which has suffered since the 1990s, has had economic issues, has had political issues, but one which is seen as an aggressor nation, or at least is led by a man who's an aggressor, which is why I would say this is a Pyrrhic victory. Vladimir Putin may get what he wants in the short run, but in the longer run, what I'm concerned about is that it's the Russian people who suffer, as well as the Ukrainian people, as well as the international community.
Let's talk about the long run, because we are wondering, are there other options that are left for world powers or world leaders to save Ukraine?
Well, certainly. I mean, it's possible to try to get messages across to Vladimir Putin to say, look, you need an off-ramp here. You need to have some type of diplomacy that will stop your forces, but at the same time negotiate for security, not just security for Moscow, but security for Moscow and Kyiv, and indeed for Europe. It is possible that someone like Prime Minister Modi, who has spoken to Vladimir Putin since the offensive started, could try to broker this, to try to say to Putin, look, India is your friend. India has political and military links with you. Do you really want to do this? Because we will find it hard to support this the longer the war goes on. Turkey has offered to mediate. I don't think that's as serious a possibility. But I think the more voices that are up there that are raised with Putin, which says, we're not talking about overthrowing you, Mr. Putin. We're not talking about overthrowing Russia. We're talking about a Russia which lives in peace with its neighbors. Work with us on this. Again, do I think it'll stop Putin in the short run? Probably not. But I think the very effort when you have an aggressor to do two things. One is to respond firmly to the aggression and say it is not acceptable. And two, to say we will look for an alternative here. You have to maintain this even at what is a very perilous time for the people of Ukraine.
Finally, Mr. Professor, before I let you go, despite Putin being called the aggressor, some say he's a bully. Who do you think he's bullying? Is it the NATO? Is it the EU? Is it the West? Or is it Ukraine?
I mean, the line that Vladimir Putin will use, and you heard it from his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, yesterday, is that this is all because NATO was expanding through Europe and that NATO was surrounding Russia. Now, that's not true. That's a pretext. That's a cover, which is that NATO was not on the point of making Ukraine a member, that NATO does have links with Ukraine, but they are largely in terms of training and logistics. They have very few forces, even in Eastern Europe, compared to the size of the Russian forces. Instead, the basis of all of this has been not just, let's not use a word like aggressor or bully. Let's get to the specifics. Vladimir Putin said week after week after week, Ukraine is part of greater Russia. He wants his legacy to be, because he's an old man, he's been in power for more than 20 years, he wants Ukraine to be absorbed, to no longer be independent. And beyond that, he wants to break up the security system in Eastern Europe so that the Baltics no longer feel secure, so that Balkan states no longer feel secure. He wants to make Russia great by either taking over countries or by keeping them unsettled. And I think the more you come back to him and say, you cannot hide beyond yelling about security by causing insecurity. This is not the legacy you want. That's something, again, which concerns not only Europe, but it concerns everyone, including people in Asia. Because if Vladimir Putin can do this to another country, someone could try to do it to a country like India as well, claiming they're the victim, when in fact, they're the ones who are, as you put it, the bully.
Professor Scott Lucas, thank you very much for your time and for talking to WION today.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.